Hi, I'm Tony. Welcome to Concordia Church Online.
Hi, I'm Richard, Concordia's pastor. This weekend is my 34th wedding anniversary. And it's been good. It's been real good. Not perfect by a long shot. Not happy every single moment, and actually frustrating at sometimes, but still good. And I'm glad that 34 years ago I said, I do. Now in 34 years of marriage, I've learned a few things, including there's the right way and there's my wife's way. And they're both the same thing. No, not really. I mean, we're like probably most of you, that we both have our own ideas, and we both think that we're right, and we think that we're right most, if not all of the time. And that's human nature, I suppose. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's healthy. I mean, looking back on my 34 years of marriage, I can think that probably most of the times that we were having what my mom called those intense discussions, that they were the times that we were saying, no, I'm right, and just digging in our heels on that. And we weren't going to give. We weren't just like listening to each other, because why should I listen to you? Because I'm right. Which begs the question, I think, not just for marriage, but for life. What is right? And how do we define it? Maybe that seems like a simple question, but it's really not. Not anymore. I mean, it used to be, back in the day, the Bible, or if you were in a different culture, some other religious or sacred text would be the standard for how people behaved and for what they valued. But now that's all been replaced by experiences and desires and preferences and feelings and defining right for myself. Now, right is what you say is right, as long as you don't hurt anyone, as long as you're tolerant of everyone else. Do your own thing. Make up your own rules. Do what you want. Do what makes you happy, because, well, happiness and individual fulfillment is the highest and best goal, which, frankly, sounds kind of appealing. But what has defining right for myself, what's it really led to? Let's think about that frankly and honestly for a moment. And I'm not bashing culture here, because I'm part of the culture. I'm just asking all of us, churchgoer and non-churchgoer alike, to examine the results of this sort of what I say is right sort of thinking. For example, what is that I define right, and why determine what makes me happy done to marriages and families? I mean, logically, if that's the standard, then people can say, well, I was happy once, but this person that I've been married to for 10 years now, well, my feelings have changed. They just don't make me happy now, so maybe we should just call it quits. I mean, I think that maybe logic like that is why the divorce rate now is like 5 times what it was 50 years ago. And I'd argue that's not a good thing overall, not for any part of society. And what about other things? I mean, whereas I define what's right and my happiness is the highest good, what has that done to the social fabric? Has the erosion of absolute standards actually contributed to what I'd call the uncivil society and unsocial media? What has define your own right done to our ability to not only discuss problems, but solve complicated problems? I mean, what do you think? What are the results of people defining right for themselves? Hit pause and take a few minutes to think and talk about that. So I define what's right also comes with its own issues, doesn't it? I mean, take marriage again. If you have to make me happy is what defines a marriage, then how can I have any confidence that the relationship is going to hold together, it's going to last? How can I ever know that I'm making you happy enough? How can I stop from walking around on eggshells all the time because I'm worried that happy is going to change in a snap? I mean, isn't commitment a better foundation for keeping marriages and relationships together? Or take faith. I mean, if you believe in a God, shouldn't that God by definition be bigger than you? Not some sort of a puny God like Hulk can throw Loki around, but a God that is huge, is big, is above you? But doesn't insisting on redefining the text and interpreting the texts, updating the text to fit the times, doesn't that logically lead to the conclusion that you're making yourself your own God and your own law? Not that anybody ever is going to admit to that, but is that good? David in Psalm 23 offers us an alternative that actually might lead to better results in our lives than the course that we're currently pursuing, the one where everyone defines right for themselves. Listen, Psalm 23, here's the alternative. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Now, once again, David, as he's writing this, is drawing on his experience in his early life as a shepherd. So again, we're going to look at a few life lessons from sheep to help us understand what he's talking about here. Now, there's a common misconception about sheep and goats. From what I've read, the common misconception about sheep and goats is that since they can eat just about anything, they can survive just about anywhere. Well, that's just not true. Because sheep are notorious creatures of habit, and left to their own devices, here's what they're going to do. They're going to graze in the same place until there's nothing left. And they're going to walk the same trails until they dig deep ruts that are really hard to navigate. And they're going to pollute their own ground until it's so full of disease and parasites that it becomes a real issue. And the sheep are going to love every minute of that. Not even aware until it happens that they've been hurting themselves all along by doing their own thing and going their own way. Silly, smelly, and stupid rears its ugly head once again. Now the remedy is to keep the flocks moving and to keep the pastures rotating. And this prevents all those issues of overgrazing and rutted trails and polluted land. But the sheep aren't going to do that themselves, are they? Right? They're creatures of habit, which means they like what they're doing, and they like where they're doing it, and they are not going to change. They are not going to move, not on their own. They're creatures of habit, and they're not going to change those things, those habits, even if they're bad ones, which sounds a lot like people, doesn't it? I mean, sheep need a shepherd, right? They need a shepherd to show them where the best pastures are, and then to actually physically take them there, to physically lead them to the right place, the place where they're actually going to thrive the best. And from what I've read, again, about sheep herding back in the day, that shepherds who would move their sheep around in the summer dry season, they would actually tend to try to move their sheep almost every day to a new pasture, to a different range. And they'd actually scout that out beforehand, and they'd plan the path carefully of where they were going to rotate each day. Now, what does it tell you about the shepherd? Well, to me it says the shepherd knows the land really well. He knows the really good spots to go. He knows the advantages and the drawbacks of each grazing spot. He also knows the sheep really well, and he knows what's best for both. And so he's going to lead the sheep in the right way, whether the sheep know it's the right way or not. And he's going to persist in that, in leading them, even if the sheep resist. And sheep are going to resist because sheep, again, are those creatures of habit, and they don't always see what's best right away. Right? They'd rather keep doing what they've been doing, right where they've been doing it, right along with everyone else, even if it ends up being harmful. But the shepherd knows what's good for them. And so he leads them where they need to go into the pasture that's best for them. Because the shepherd sees what the sheep don't. The shepherd sees that the way he's leading them is what's best for them. That this is what is going to keep them healthy and happy and not just safe and protect. It's going to keep them thriving and free from danger, which is really what both the sheep and the shepherd want in the end, isn't it? And guess what? When they get there, again, from what I've read, when they get where the shepherd was leading, the sheep actually, they like it. He opens the new gate into the new pasture, and the sheep are filled with such excitement that it's almost like they're jumping up and down seeing that pasture. It's what they wanted. It's what they needed. It's what's best for them. They just didn't see it till they got there, which is why the shepherd had to lead them, because they just never go there on their own. Now stop and think about this for a moment and apply that to your spiritual life. Take a moment to think about, how does Jesus lead us like that? And what's better about Jesus leading you than you leading yourself? Now, maybe we know intellectually that Jesus leads us better than we lead ourselves, or at least we're willing to consider that as a possibility. But a big part of our problem is that we're still sheep. And because we're sheep, that means that most of the time we just don't want to follow. We don't want to be led. We don't want to give up our right to do our own thing and to stay where we are and to make our own decisions and to define what's our right and happiness. We don't really want to go. We don't really want to move. We like being where we are. And we like being with everybody else. And we sort of, because we're sheep, we believe the lie that that's okay. That this place is just as good as any other place. Well, it's not. It's not. I mean, where Jesus is leading us, it's better than where we are right now. And it's not only the right way, it's the best way. Now, maybe that's a little hard to visualize. But let me go ahead and describe that path of righteousness. Let me go ahead and describe the right path that Jesus wants to lead you on, what it looks like. And as you're listening to that, I want you to think about and consider, if I were in that place, would the results be better? If I were in that place, would they likely be better than the results of the path that I'm on right now? Right? On the path of righteousness, Jesus leads me to delight in doing things for others, like he did. Not just doing things for myself or to satisfy my own desires. On the path of righteousness, Jesus leads me to live with integrity and with consistency, just like he did, instead of doing whatever it takes to fit in or to get along with the crowd. On that path of righteousness, Jesus leads me to accept differences like he did, instead of pushing people away or railing against those who don't think exactly like I do about every single issue. I mean, look at Jesus' own band of followers. Jesus intentionally and deliberately put together a right-wing nationalist zealot and a collaborating with the enemy tax collector and showed them in that little small group how to get along. On the path of righteousness, Jesus leads me to show grace and mercy, again, like he did, to people who need it, to people who stumble and fall or who don't meet my standards, who are on the margins of life. On the path of righteousness, Jesus leads me to define love like he did. Not by what I get, but by what I give. And not by what I can squeeze out of you, but by what I sacrifice. On the path of righteousness, Jesus leads me to forgive like he did, which means not keeping score. And instead of holding a grudge, letting go. I mean, now that's hard because people are disappointing us all the time. But think about this. Do we make God happy by what we do all the time? We don't, do we? And yet, still God loves us. Still God forgives us. Still Jesus erases our bad record, and still God counts Jesus' record of doing all the right things. He counts that as our record instead of what we've done. Now, we can't do that last part for others. Only Jesus can make our sins go away. And only Jesus can look at us through the record of what he did right rather than what we did wrong. But we can start treating others the same way Jesus treats us and everybody else. And that's the path he's leading us on. Right? And is that better? I think you have to at least consider it. Right? What would our lives look like if we walked Jesus' path instead of that path where we choose what's right? What would it look like if we followed where Jesus is leading instead of leading ourselves or following along with all the rest of the sheep where they're going? What would happen in our relationships? How would we feel about ourselves? What would happen to the way people related to each other in our communities? I mean, is it possible that Jesus' way is better? And that when he invites us to follow, he's actually leading us to a place where we're not only protected from harm, but where we're actually going to thrive? I think that's what Jesus had in mind. Now, we can't do it by ourselves. We're sheep, remember? But I love what Paul tells us about that. It's Philippians chapter 2, verse 13. God is working in you, giving you the desire and the power to do what pleases him. God is working in you to help you do what he wants you to do, to follow the shepherd. He's working in you. Number one, it says he's giving you the desire. I mean, since we like to define right for ourselves, Jesus' way is not natural for sheep like us. And so God's Spirit is working in you to make you want to follow Jesus where he leads, just because it's a better path. And giving you the power. Well, since we're sheep and we're stuck in these deep ruts of doing things our own way, and they got so deep that we just don't have the strength to climb out of them. We can't do that by ourselves. So God's Spirit is working in us to lift us out of those ruts of our own making and give us the ability to actually follow where Jesus leads and to keep on doing so. Now, Jesus leads where we wouldn't naturally go, in the paths of his righteousness, which, when you're first starting out, might feel a little strange, maybe even a little countercultural, but it's a better path. Right? It's the right path. It's the best path. The path where we not only survive, but where we can thrive. All right? Here's the question. Will you stay where you are, or will you follow where Jesus leads? Let's talk to God about that, because we're sheep, remember, and we need a little help. Now, if that's the first time that you've ever prayed something like that, here's your next step. Email me. Email me at pastor@concordiachurch.com. And if you do that, I'm going to email you back a free PDF of some next steps that you can take to help you keep walking with Jesus. There's a bonus round for all of you, and that's this. I want to spend a few minutes talking about just a hidden gem that I see in this particular section of Psalm 23. I mean, we've talked about in this conversation how on the right path, God defines what's right, not us, and that's best, and that's true. And we've also talked about how God's path is the best one to follow. And then when we do, we get better results. And that's also true. But the hidden gem here in this sentence in the psalm is that Jesus doesn't just show us the right path and lead us on the right path. Jesus actually is the path. You see, there's a lot of times people get the idea that kind of eventually all roads, all ways kind of end up leading to God, as long as you just try to do the right thing, as long as you believe sincerely enough, or as long as you believe in yourself enough. But that would imply that we can make things right on our own. And we can't, because we're sheep. Silly, smelly, stupid, and helpless. But there was a guy named Jeremiah who said this: "The Lord is our righteousness." And you know what? He was right. How did I know that? Because Jesus said this: "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me." And so what Jesus is saying here is that when he leads me in the paths of righteousness, he's leading me to the Father by offering me his righteousness instead of my own. Which means the way to God isn't a road at all. It's a person. And the person is Jesus. The one who's here right now with you, right where you are, coming close to you and saying, "Follow me." Now here's one way that you can do that. One way to follow Jesus is generosity. Because we've been talking about self-centeredness and self-righteousness today, and when we give, that's like an antidote against that self-centered virus. We don't give because we want to try to get something from God. God's been generous and he's given us everything that he has. We give because it draws us closer to God's heart. If you've never given before, I want to encourage you to find a place to give this week, and to do it in something that's close to your heart. Maybe it's some cause that's in your neighborhood, in your community, in our world, in our country. Go ahead and do that. If you're connected to a church, give there. If your heart's at Concordia, there's a couple of ways you'll see coming across the screen through our online platforms that you can give as well. Thanks for listening to this message today. As you work through the week, think about how leading yourself, where does that end up? And if you follow where Jesus leads on those paths of righteousness, isn't that really a better place? A place where you can not only survive, but can thrive? Give it a chance.